Those emotions, they were put on hold by time, but at Claire's bridal weekend at a Verbo beach house, those emotions also made the trip. Your together awaits. Find it with Verbo.
It was true to its word. GoodRx was true to its word. The Medicare drug plan that I had to be on, every time I went to the pharmacy, it was a different price. But now with that GoodRx app, I pull it up on my phone while I'm waiting in line, and it's so much cheaper than that prescription drug plan.
Good evening, community. I'd like to call the session to order. Ms. Williams?
Ms. Saunier. Ms. Cousins.
Present.
Ms. Fowler.
Here.
Ms. Vowell.
Present.
Mr. Davis.
Present.
Ms. Jones.
Here.
Dr. Roberts.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Consent agenda. Okay. I'd like to move that we accept the consent agenda. Thank you, Dr. Adams. We're moving into the June consent agenda. Are there any questions or any items that you want specific information around?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to thank Dr. Adams for being diligent in getting us all the answers ahead of time that we have had.
Dr. Roberts, I do have a question on 6/8/2110. And I think that question was answered before, but I have some concerns about the substitutes. And I want to know, are they going to be required to go through the same professional development as our regular teachers?
To answer, yes, ma'am. This is the first year we have put out a contract for substitute services. As you might know, this is going to be a very difficult year with the pandemic occurring, and so we will still have some home-based substitutes, but this company will support substitutes coming on a daily basis when we have shortages of substitutes. So this is a contract to do that. This is the first time we've done it. We put the RFP out and received 3 companies, and this is the company that we selected. So yes, they will go through the professional development that our teachers will go through as well.
And this company is responsible for doing safety checks and that kind of thing on these people before?
Yes,
they come
ma'am.
to our
Background
students?
checks. Yes, ma'am. That is correct.
So are they going to be paid the same scale as our regular in-house substitutes?
I don't remember the exact amount. My understanding is comparable. There is a fee for them obviously identify the persons, do all of the background checks and those kinds of things. So I think there may be, I will get you that answer, Ms. Jones, in terms of what they will get in terms of that. It's part of the RFP. I just don't have it in front of me, but I can get you that information.
And who's going to be in charge of kind of checking this group out, this ESS before, or as they go along to see whether or not they're going to be performing at the level they need to?
In the Human Resources Department, we have a substitute coordinator who manages all substitutes right now in terms of hiring them, in terms of telling them what schools to go to on a regular basis. So that person will continue to do that work, just do that work through this vendor at this point in time.
Just to follow up on what Donna just said, isn't that also the responsibility of the building principal to monitor substitutes?
Well, once they get on site, I thought she
Yes.
was talking about prior to them getting on site to get into the building. We do have someone in, matter of fact, I think there are 2 persons in Human Resources who manages our substitutes right now. But the building principal obviously will give feedback on how they're performing and make recommendations if they need to return or not. This would likely be more for the day-to-day subs as opposed to the home-based subs. Right now, we have home-based subs assigned to schools in case a teacher is absent. That's a regular employee. That's a district employee. We're not touching those. We're talking about somebody who calls in on a Monday and said they're not going to be there Monday morning. Then subs can be dispensed from this agency to support that particular school.
And these subs are already pre-approved and they have background checks?
Yes,
and-
ma'am, they are. Yes, ma'am.
Will they have an opportunity to grow? Because we've been talking about a teacher shortage for a long time. Are they going to have an opportunity to receive the same type of training?
That is an excellent question. I can check and see. I know with our home-based subs that occurs, but what you're asking, if these persons will have an opportunity to get, it is likely that they won't be able to get the Parson Bluets dollars because they're not employees. But that is an excellent question that I'll get an answer for you to see how those persons might be supported by the district if they're going to become district employees at some point in the future. Excellent question.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the consent agenda?
I have a question. I have a question in reference to, I can't see, 06082163. I'm just trying to understand, I get the need, and I think it was another one in reference to the dropout rate or case management, and this is with Grace Hill Settlement. How are we doing on getting data? How do we know the impact that these programs are actually having?
In the consent agenda, in the background information, we have data that speaks to this. I don't have this data in front of me. My familiarity with Grace Hill is that they were formerly at Bryan Hill, and there were social workers who were reaching out, Bryan Hill and I want to say Clay. And quite frankly, Bryan Hill had close to 99% attendance because these persons were social workers who went to homes and got kids out of homes. We could not do it because of our regulations in terms of driving kids in cars and those kinds of things. And so this agency did an excellent job in that, but the documentation is in the background of the consent agenda item, and I can pull that for you. But Grace Hill, I know for a fact, was one of the exemplary programs that supported Bryan Hill in this effort, and now they're looking to expand this work beyond just Bryan Hill.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Adams, could I recommend that there's an opportunity to walk through the consent agenda and locate the
Items.
supporting documentations that's there?
Yes, ma'am. I can.
It may be very new to our newest members.
Yes, ma'am. I could do that. Probably at the next work session, or maybe probably before the next board meeting. All right.
I had just to follow up on Ms. Tony's question. Do we know just ballpark how many students per year are being served by this program?
I do not. I do not. I can get you the numbers, but I do not.
Any additional questions? Dr. Adams?
We have a presentation by Mr. Steve Carroll, our lobbyist. It's the next item on the agenda.
Am I on? Okay. Madam President, Dr. Adams, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity tonight to kind of give you a recap of the past legislative session that ended a week ago Friday. If you've been reading my reports and certainly the end of session reports, you know that it was a pretty hard and brutal session in regards to trying to defend traditional public education. So I won't try to rehash what I've already written and you've read, but just to go over a few of the things. In my 38 years, either as a legislator or a lobbyist in Jeff City, I've never seen legislation come at public education like I did this year. And it was constant from day one to the very last night of session at 4:30 in the morning when we finally killed the charter local funding bill. There were 2,500 bills introduced. We were probably monitoring or watching over 300 of them when it finally was said and done, excluding the budget, not to mention hundreds of amendments and substitute for bills. I think that it was a difficult session, especially from the standpoint of last year where we had the COVID and not much activity really occurred in the Capitol except for the first 2 months and then the last 3 weeks of session. Well, this year was just kind of the opposite. The first 2 months of session, you had limited access to the Capitol, limited access to legislators. If I was running the opposition lobbying campaign, I would have made a run for it those first 2 months of session and tried to ram through some education choice bill while they had the opportunity before you started getting more and more feedback from citizens, from educators, from different folks when the buildings finally started opening up after spring break. But that just didn't occur for whatever reason. They made a run at Senate Bill 55, which I reported throughout the year was the omnibus education choice bill that had everything in it. It had Senate Bill 25, which was the statewide charter school expansion. It had Senate Bill 95, which was the virtual expansion, unlimited, that totally took a school district out of the ability to be the gatekeeper, so to speak, and would have made virtual schools their own LEAs, basically virtual charter schools statewide. Very problematic. I mean, that would have been a drain on the state treasury for sure. I mean, that bill also had at times statewide open enrollment. It had recall elections for school board members. It had term limits for the State Board of Education. It had the local charter funding in it as well as the voucher tax credit, House Bill 349. They couldn't get traction with that. They gave a run at it in late February. They didn't go back to it until April. They never could get 18 votes in the Senate. I think because it had so much stuff in it, they couldn't get beyond 15 votes. We were able to keep about 17 votes in opposition to it, so it never came to a vote. Now, on the House side, they did things a little different. I mean, it was a rough year from the standpoint. One, the education chairman in the Senate is a strong advocate of education choice, as Dr. Adams well knows, meeting her this session on his visits to Jeff City. The House chairman is also a strong choice advocate, as well as a majority leader in the Senate and the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House number one priority this year was the ESAs, the tax credit vouchers. He was bound and determined to get it. And so there was some playoff between the Senate. The Senate President Pro Tem wanted his gas tax passed, and the House finally did do it after the House, or they passed the voucher tax credit, so which the Speaker wanted. But I think the Speaker did it right. Instead of combining a bunch of education choice bills, he stuck with what he wanted in 349, which was a voucher tax credit. But they had to water it down so much just to get the 82 votes to pass it. So I think of all the education choice bills that could have crossed the finish line, in my opinion, that was the least harmful. They were able to get 20 senators to vote for it. You need 18 in the Senate to pass a bill, but they were able to get 3 outstate senators to vote for it because it didn't affect their district. The watered down version said it only takes place in charter counties or cities with 30,000 population or more. It would only take effect for IEP students or those students twice as much for the free and reduced lunch family of 4 is roughly $97,000. Plus, it would only take effect if the school transportation formula is funded 40% of the mandated 75% of the state statute. And then if you lost a student from a public school, that student would still be counted for up to 5 years for state aid coming down. So, I mean, it really was watered down to get across the finish line. But then the Senate Appropriations Chairman, Dan Hageman from outstate Missouri, who also voted for it, said, I'll only vote for it if we have a different bill come and lower the amount of the $50 million tax credit to $25 million, which that passed as well in Senate Bill 86. So that's what got across the finish line, unfortunately. But I know that Dr. Adams, you will be getting a letter from MASA probably by Thursday. They're sending letters to the governor because there's no guarantee that this governor is going to sign this bill. There's some issues between the speaker and the governor that are playing out. And so I know the school boards all across the state are going to be sending letters to the governor asking for a veto on 349. I certainly would recommend this board do the same. As I said, Dr. Adams, you'll be getting the letter from the school administrators probably Thursday in the mail on what their letter is going to look like. I talked with their executive director today on the way down here, just so you know that's coming up. As far as the budget, the foundation formula was fully funded. We had more money in Prop C than ever before. $958 million is scheduled to go out to school districts. Obviously, St. Louis will get a good share of that based on the weighted ADA that we're lucky to have under the new formula. We were also able to get $20 million in additional funding for the transportation formula. And then also for the first time, we were able to get $2.5 million for our reading literacy program, a line item just for the St. Louis Public Schools. And I have to compliment the majority leader, the Republican leader in the House, Dean Plocher, for making that possible for us. He did a good job. We worked hard in helping get him elected majority leader. I think he's going to do a good job. He already showed that he is. He's going to run for speaker in a year, and he wanted to do something to help us. And I thought that's a great place because I asked Dr. Adams how much that new program was going to cost starting next year, and he said roughly a little over $2 million, I think is what you said, Dr. Adams. So we were able to get 2.5 in that. The one bill I want to end up on that I think was the most critical, the most harmful to the St. Louis Public Schools was House Bill 137, Senate Bill 218, the charter local funding bill. They're going to make a run on that again next year. Doug Thalman just had a commentary in today's Missouri Independent. It's one of the state newspapers, state government newspapers, as well as the Missouri Scout. He reported on it today that he's not trying to take money away from anyone. He just wants an extra $1,000 per charter student to come to them. It's only a matter of fairness as far as equal funding. Well, you have to also take into consideration what it costs to educate that child between a charter school and between the public school. And so I think it passed the House by 4 additional votes, but in the Senate, the charters thought they were just going to run this through, and that just wasn't going to be the case. I appreciate Ms. Banks and Dr. Adams for putting together the numbers for me. I needed to know the numbers so I could show the senators, this is what it costs the district to educate a kid. This is not what the charter spend per student. We have transportation costs. We have DSA costs. We have the VIC costs, special education. It goes on and on. And so they're talking about the charter should have an extra $1,000 per student to make it fair. Let me tell you, if we put all the expenses on the table, the charter schools would be paying us, not the other way around. And so, but I think that we need to make sure that we get those numbers out there. I think we need to get a little press out there, I think, during the off session because we know it's coming back and try to tell our story because we have senators after they started looking at the facts that stuck with us. Again, Jill Shoup was there. And then on the last night of session, Carla May and Steve Roberts were with me. We met with the charter lobbyists. they wanted this and that. We said, you're not getting it. And I mean, so they really stuck with the district, and our hats are off to them. And if you see them, you need to personally thank them for what they did. As I said, it's coming back next year. Would have cost the district about $17 million a year. And that just doesn't come out of thin air. And so next year's going to be interesting. And it could be just as tough a legislative session. I think they're going to come back, since they think they got the ESA this year. I think they're going to come back and try to do charter school expansion along with the charter funding, is what I'm guessing. Now, but next year is an election year, and it's also redistricting. And in my experience, every redistricting year, election year, every 10 years, the legislators don't know what their boundary lines are going to be. They don't know who their opponents may be. And so sometimes they're not willing as much to vote on a controversial bill as they might otherwise. And so we're going to have to see how that plays out. I know that I think the school choice advocates realize that they may just have this one more session coming up to make a major push. Because of redistricting, there's a chance that there could be 2 or 3 state senators' seats that switch, that have been education choice in the past supporters to traditional public education supporters, which would make a world of difference in the state Senate, where we could actually maybe, after it's been some years now, that we can start playing a little offense, maybe instead of just playing defense. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds for next year, but we'll certainly keep you updated on it as much as possible. I will say too, that I am proud of the Public Education Lobbying Corps and the job they did. We met every day in the Capitol. I'm talking all the groups, the School Boards Association, the school administrators, all the teacher groups, 420. I mean, every day we tried to put out our game plan, because every day that it was a battle. And certainly my team, my associates, and the folks that we hired did an excellent job. John Dalton, Don Nicholas, Rodney Hubbard, Kelsey Robinson, Andy Arnold, Jay Hahn. I mean, we had a good group that worked really hard, and I think we just outworked the other side, in my opinion. So, but if this was January and I was talking to you, I would tell you we may have a bad year. But in the way it all ended, I think it was what was out there. It turned out to be a pretty good year. So I'll stop there. I don't want to talk too long. I'll be happy to maybe answer any questions. But I appreciate also my reports to you, and if you reached out to legislators on behalf of the school district, I appreciate that, because grassroots is certainly very important, without a doubt.
Steve, speaking of that, would you mind getting us a bit of sample language from the SLPS voice to write a letter, as you mentioned, to the governor asking for a veto of 349?
Oh, veto? Sure.
Yeah, just something that, because I know that there are overarching points, but something that's SLPS specific, something that's specific to St. Louis City, because I think the more voices and the more perspectives that comes from, the better. So if you
Okay.
could just
You
give
want
us
me to
like,
try to get you a rough draft?
yeah, a
or
rough draft,
something,
or like,
some
a few talking
points?
points specific to how it affects us that we could craft and reach out. That would be
Okay,
helpful.
I can do that. We have until July 14th, the governor has to sign or veto that bill. I imagine he'll do something, I'm guessing mid-June. You got to remember, there's going to be a special session. Not sure when it's going to be. It's probably going to be the end of summer, or they'll try to coincide it with veto session, because they didn't pass the FRA. And unfortunately, they went against the will of the people. Medicaid expansion, that's going to come back, though. A judge is going to settle that. They're going to end up having to pay for it. We're going to have a supplemental budget in January to do just that. But the FRA tax is vital for the Medicaid program in this state, because we have nursing homes, we have hospitals that tax their own beds in an effort to raise $1.6 billion, in an effort to draw down $3.7 billion from the feds. So that's got to pass. So we know he's going to call a special session. I doubt if he will call a special session for anything else. I'm guessing that will be, like I said, close to veto session. If he does veto 349, I don't believe there's enough votes to override that. He'd never get them in the Senate. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think it is a good idea for the board to send a letter.
I have a question for you. I was trying to understand how the tax credit works. Do parents who want to get the tax credit have to pay for a private school and then apply for tax credit on their tax return, or how exactly?
Well,
does
it goes
that work?
into this education group, organization, nonprofit that
okay.
oversees it. they will pick and choose the students as they come. It caps the amount of tax credit. What they do is they will pay the parent up to $6,375, roughly the SAT in the state. It will be far less if there are more students that participate in, because the mandate, it all depends. If it does take effect and if Senate Bill 86 also passes, then it's going to cap at 25 million. So that's really going to cut it back. And so then those students can go to private, parochial, they can homeschool, they can go to charter school, they can even go to a different public school, not of their residence. So, but you know, $6,300 isn't going to cut it for some of these private schools or parochial schools. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because it sounds like it really only benefits those parents who can afford to pay for private school anyway, and then they get extra credit,
Yeah.
because I don't
And
know
they'll
many
go
private
after-
schools that cost
they'll
less
be
than
the ones going after the money.
$6,300. So again, those who need the most will get the least. And then another question I had, the St. Louis Business Journal last Friday had a good article about the education bill that did pass, and they talked about those leaders who live in the outskirts that aren't affected by charter schools, and how do we get to them so that they won't vote for something that hurts other districts when in fact they know it won't hurt their school districts? What actions can we take to get to them?
I mean, that's one issue with Senator Carla May that she talks about. She said, you know, I'm going to vote for this charter school expansion because I want them to experience what we've had to experience here in St. Louis. You've just got legislators saying, don't do it to me. We can do it to them. But I'm thinking you're starting to see, such as Senator Lincoln Huff in Springfield, who sees that the number of buildings that Springfield has for their public school is far less for the amount of students they have. He sees that we have a problem here in St. Louis and in Kansas City that we're closing our school buildings, and yet more charters are starting up. We just got to educate. They're starting to see that, and quite frankly, we put in a bill to have a moratorium on no more charter schools, do a task force to study it, you know, for the next 3 years. We might get some attention too. Play a little offense. I mean, there's always a way to get the attention of other legislators. But there has been talk. I mean, the Kansas City delegation and the St. Louis delegation, you know, are frustrated that you got these outstate legislators that want to expand school choice, but yet they don't want it in their area. And I mean, that's the only reason the ESA bill passed in the Senate was it didn't affect those 3 senators because they didn't have a town over 30,000 in their district. So it said, hey, it's not going to affect us. It affects somebody else. That's unfortunate. Anyway, I can just tell you, I've never been so happy for a legislative session to be over in my life. So, I mean, it got bad because I think there was some disagreements and some promises that were not kept. And so the session ended 3.5 hours before it was even scheduled to. In all my years, I've never seen the minority Senate leader shut down the session. There were only 2 Republicans in the chamber at the time when he did it. No one objected. He moved to adjourn side die, and it was over. So
I'd just like to say to the parents who are listening in is to make sure you are aware of what's happening. You have people who don't get impacted by the decisions they're making in Jefferson City. So we need to make sure we get to them and start expressing our concerns more. And then the voucher program, please know that a lot of people won't be able to take advantage of it. And those who have are more likely to be able to take advantage of it. And that's a disgrace for our legislators to enact something that most of those who need the most help won't be able to get help from it. So please start sending notes, emails to your state representatives to let them know that you're not happy with these things.
And I just want to say, it was a rough year for you, but $17 million was a lot to be able to save. And I think that's a job well done. We as St. Louis Public School, the board, the district don't have a lot of lobbyists. And I know the opposition probably had about 20 or 30 lobbyists. So to be able to pull off what you were able to pull off, I think that's a huge win for us. But I think we need to do more in educating the community, like Ms. Fowler is saying, making sure people understand what this really looks like and what this means. This is the time we really need to start promoting what St. Louis Public School is doing, as well as educating the community on the impacts that will happen if something like $17 million would have been taken from that budget. And it wouldn't have been just 1 year, correct? It would have been
Been ongoing,
only from St. Louis Public Schools
and Kansas City.
and Kansas City.
The problem with that bill is that our left flank was exposed, so to speak, because Kansas City is in a different scenario situation than we are. They're on that financial cliff. They came to an agreement with the charter schools because roughly 50% of their kids are going to charter schools. And so they agreed to pay the charters more money, I guess through an MOU, but the charters wanted it in statute. So Kansas City negotiated it. We never did. And yet the charters wanted us in the bill because that was the bigger pot of money. Yet we never talked with them. They always said Dr. Adams refused to talk to the charters. Well, I'm sorry, what's there to talk about? You just want to come in and take more of our money, yet our costs are higher than yours. There's nothing really to negotiate. But the reason it passed the House was we lost about 10 Kansas City legislators that would normally vote against something like that. But since Kansas City signed off on it, we lost their votes. And so that hurt. But then when we got into the Senate, they couldn't go against the filibuster that we could do. So they never even brought it up for a vote. I mean, I appreciate Dr. Adams coming down on that. I know he lost sleep at night on that bill as I did. That would have been a huge blow to St. Louis Public Schools. But I think that's where we did the right thing by getting the information out. Facts are stubborn things. They don't lie. And the numbers didn't lie. And the senators could look at that sheet that we handed out to them and they said, these are the facts. Now, charters show us your numbers. Charters wouldn't show them their numbers. So we have to do that, I believe, in this off session before next year because it's coming back. So.
Yeah, Mr. Carroll, I just have a couple questions, and thank you so much for that report and your reports throughout the year. And playing defense isn't as exciting as playing offense, but
that's for sure.
It was a relief that was over. So thanks for all your efforts. In terms of the committee assignments, I don't know how that works, but is there any possibility that the Senate Education Committee chair may be someone who is a little less hostile next year to same problem?
It's up to the President Pro Tem to assign the chairman. And there's a lot of horse trading going on. For him to get a vote to be elected President Pro Tem, I'm sure a lot of promises were made to certain people. And, it's just unfortunate, but you're not going to see a change there. They stacked the committee in the House and in the Senate. I understand if you're the speaker, you're President Pro Tem and you support school choice, you're going to stack them. So it was 5-4 against us on every vote in the Senate. And it was like, 10-6 against us every time in the House. So it just, we had to do and fight on the floor and in the hallways instead.
And in terms of the educational savings account, I like to call them vouchers because that's what they really want them to be. Ms. Fowler is exactly right. It's a despicable what they're doing. The argument was that it's going to help any child to be able to go to any school they want to, but that amount is really just going to help people that can afford to go to private schools to get a tax break and get an incentive. But my question is, I know there's been some talk about that there's possible constitutional challenge because essentially what's going to happen, especially in the St. Louis area, is it's going to take public money and go to private religious schools. Is there any?
If he signs the bill, there'll be a challenge.
Okay.
There'll be a lawsuit. I'm almost convinced of it.
Good. And you mentioned our opposition. Could you just kind of give a sense of who the opposition is? Are these national groups that are coming in to push this?
It is.
Are they local groups? Is it just the Missouri Charter Public School Association? What role does the Opportunity Trust play
Big role.
in these bills?
The city fund, national coming in here, running the Opportunity Trust. I mean, they had 10 lobbyists, but then the overall education choice groups. I mean, you've got the virtual school, the for-profit providers. I mean, they had a half a dozen lobbyists, just them alone. I mean, the ESA people, the charter folks. I mean, there's so many different groups that have so many aspects of school choice. Like I said, the virtuals, the ESA, the charter. So, I mean, it was an army of folks. And that's why I say I am proud of the traditional public education lobby corps because we were outnumbered probably 3-4 to 1 by the time we put all of our people in. And the School Boards Association, the teacher groups, they hired contract lobbyists just for the session to help us, just to have feet on the ground to try that may have, a relationship with a certain rep or senator. So, but we don't have the money that they do to spend.
And the city fund has Reed Hastings and Netflix, Walton Family Foundation, Bill Gates, all of that. So unlimited funds.
Yeah, John
And-
Fox.
And they're coming in to reduce the amount that we can use in our district to help our kids. And so to that end, in terms of House Bill 137, you talked about the information we're giving to the representatives. How much do they really understand about what services are unique to the city of St. Louis that the city of St. Louis Public School District provides to our students? I mean, you mentioned some of them, but I read that in the Missouri Independent, Mr. Thaman's op-ed, and they call it fix the glitch. But really, the glitch is the fact that our legislatures have never funded this district appropriately, and the amount of services that we provide, most people don't know. Most people don't know that we have a school solely dedicated to integrating new American students into this society. It's a model of the country, and the charter schools don't provide that service. I think they serve 25 different languages, and after 2 years, those kids are ready to go to and be integrated into a school. They don't understand that, and that costs a lot of money. They don't understand that we have a school solely dedicated to people with students with profound disabilities. Madison Therapeutic School has to provide occupational therapy, mental health services, speech language services, kids that are profoundly disabled.
And those were the costs that we put into our document.
Right, but I mean, it's a cost, it's numbers, but this is what this district provides. Not even to talk about the transportation, and the transportation costs are directly related to the desegregation agreement. I mean, think about that. We have unfunded costs to transport kids across this city because of the systemic racism that has existed in this city since its founding. I don't know if rural Missourians care about that, but they certainly need to understand that. So that's the glitch. The glitch is that we have always been underfunded for the services that we provide. We could do so much more if they just funded us appropriately. And if that money goes away, I mean, it'd be devastating, And there's no charter school, like you said, that's going to provide that. So I guess my question is, how do we get that message across?
Well, first, let me say that some, not all, but some in the education choice community don't want us to succeed. I mean, they're using this failing school district line all over the country, and they're trying to use it in the legislature. Again, facts are stubborn things. They don't lie. We gave those documents to certain legislators in the House. They didn't care. They're so bought and sold on charter schools and expansion, even though they don't even have them in their district. They just made that commitment. Again, we just have to educate them. And again, we wouldn't have lost that bill in the House had Kansas City not left us and agreed to that. They didn't need to put it in statute. We would have won. I'm convinced of it. But you can't, that's what kept us from losing this the 2 years before with St. Louis and Kansas City working together, unfortunately.
Steve, would it be safe to say the same way we have movements in reference to, fighting for causes, what have you, this is the time, especially now, that as a district, as with our parents, with our communities, we really need to kind of rally more up in Jeff City and locally, letting people know, like what Matt is saying, educating them, letting them know the effects, letting them know the great things that Madison School is doing and Nottingham School. Like these are things that we really should be out in the county, letting them know that, like what you're being told is not really the reality of what's going on within St. Louis Public Schools. I think we should offer you more support in messaging what's really going on.
Well, I just don't think we toot our horn enough. There's so many good things that are going on in this district, and they just don't know about it, unfortunately. I mean, yes, we have some challenges and problems. There's no denying that. But if they adequately funded the things that they should be funding, we might not have those challenges. And there's no glitch. I helped write the formula back in 2005 and 6. It was at that time that they kept the local funding for the charters in place like that because they knew the cost for public schools was more. So that I don't think they were ever intended to get more of the M&M tax, more of the financial institution tax, more of the utility tax and railroads. But now, because of term limits, none of the legislators remember that. So it's just, who's going to sell the story? So it's a different environment than it was 20 years ago. It just is good or bad. You just have to deal with it. So
I think it is a different environment, and what Tony said is important, getting parents and families and students, not just to write letters, but to show up in Jefferson City. Any effective lobbying effort, any effective organizing effort relies on not just one person, but a group of people. So if we could demonstrate, we do have all these people ready to go, and we've talked on this board about a committee, a legislative or advocacy committee. How could we work with you? Could you, I don't know, just brainstorming a mass text that, we keep a list of people who can be, in Jefferson City on Wednesday at 3 p.m. There's a bill coming up that we need to testify for. If we could work with people to get, the community to get people there for you to testify on behalf of St. Louis Public Schools, to tell them the things that are going on. Maybe it's a teacher on their day off. Maybe it is a family who sends a video or an email or shows up in person. But if we could do anything around that telling our story piece, I think that's critical. And that also goes to educating the community on what the facts are. It goes two ways. So the community can also educate their legislators if we make it easy for them to do so, if we make a way for them to do that. And I know that there are funding restrictions. We can't just load up a bus of parents and, take it out of the SLPS budget. But there are ways that we can work to do that and to mobilize those people. So I'd like to keep that conversation going because we have no shortage of parents and students who care about this district. There's definitely no shortage of teachers who care about this district. So any way you can facilitate their voices being heard would be great.
Were you gonna?
No.
Yeah, I think to Natalie's point, for folks watching, we've been having this internal conversation about having an advocacy and a legislation committee. And I think that that's super duper important. I think what, people are basically horse trading with public education. People are horse trading with what we have available. And I think we all know that school choice is not actually school choice. If you have an issue, and it's something that constantly came up when we were campaigning about school closings and buildings closings, but as long as we have students leaving the district, and that's what these measures are for, it gets harder for us to supply students with what we need. It gets harder to fund extracurricular activities. It gets harder to offer AP classes, and then even expanding and offering more mental health resources, more wraparound services. Less money means less options for those things. And so, I've heard from a lot of folks in the community, I've heard from a lot of elected officials that they are ready and they just want to know, how are we going to, I think, start this movement and be a little bit more vocal, be a little bit more clear, and hold people to the light. I think the other side, what you just said, are being so vigilant in their attacks. They're being so strong and they're really going for it. And so I just want folks at home to know that we know that this is going on, and we are working on getting something going on internally as a board so that we can have an organized response to state and city policy that is in our interest or against our interest, because we have folks working against it and we have folks really working for us in our favor. And so just the same fervor that we have against school closings and these other issues is so important that moving forward, that the community matches that energy when it's time to go to the Board of Aldermen, when it's time to go to Jefferson City and lobby. We need to keep that same energy alive, and we need to really be protecting our interests and protecting our money, and realizing that this is whatever is in these papers, whatever you're being told, these things are not in our interest. These things are going to hurt our students. And if we don't become more vigilant in our fight, it is definitely possible that our district could just be destabilized and be almost non-existent. Like we're getting to that point and they're going for it.
So Steve, I think it's been a while since you worked with an elected board, but Ms. Saunier brings up a good point that is, we all bring people that we have connected to through campaigning, through our neighborhood associations, through just being in the community. So if we can be of service. We are now an elected board again, back in governance. And I think we might see a little bit of change strategy in Jefferson City if we can offer you those resources.
I appreciate that. I forget anything, Dr. Adams or Dr. Roberts?
Thank you. I'm just excited about the heavy lift that was done, that you did, along with our elected officials, Carla May and Steve Roberts, and a host of other who supported public education. And I am in total agreement with the recommendations that have been set forth in terms of putting together an advocacy group, an ad hoc committee. The 2-pager that you may have gotten from Dr. Adams, I hope that we can get a copy of those talking points so that as we move among the community, we can share them as well. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Dr. Roberts, before we move on topics, would it be appropriate at this time to make a motion to explore forming that ad hoc committee or forming the ad hoc committee?
I don't think it needs a motion, but it would be put forth in the form of a bylaw change to include an ad hoc committee for governance, and then that would be voted on as a motion.
So the bylaws would need to be changed, or don't the bylaws include the ability to form an ad hoc committee?
Right, and usually so there is a section, I don't remember what section it is, about, this is the makeup of the board and these are the duties of the committee. So it would be, I believe, a bylaw that would need to be proposed to Dr. Roberts or worked on with Dr. Roberts, and then voted on as a motion.
I don't think so. I think because when we had the committee for the, not the governance, but even the governance, but the vision and thing, it was really just a matter of the board saying, yes, let's do it. And then we presented that what we wanted for approval, but it wasn't necessarily a bylaw change. It was just that we could agree that we need
Right.
to have that.
I just don't think we need a motion. I think that
Right.
we can
Yeah.
work on it.
Yeah, I think Dr. Roberts can say, let's
Yeah.
pull
Yeah.
something together and we'll vote on the wording of that committee, what it does.
I think it really depends on whether it's just an ad hoc committee or if it's a standing committee of the board.
Well, we have a general idea of what we want to do, and Matt, you can work with Jeff to frame that, and so we can move forward with that, but thanks
Okay.
so much.
Yeah, and I'd like to be involved in the framing as well.
The board has requested that the administration look at audits for human resources. First of all, good afternoon, board and public. The board has recommended that we look at audits for human resources, curriculum and policy. And so I want to give the board an update in this work session, obviously give the board an opportunity to ask any questions such that I can address them and talk about what the next steps might be as it relates to this. First of all, looking at a human resource audit, we reached out to the Council of Great City Schools, and what they indicated to us is that part of what they look at is doing a high-level review of the district's human resources operations that will be performed by the Council of Great City Schools. The council has conducted over 300 of these types of studies in more than 50 large school districts. As the board knows, we are already a member of the Council of Great City Schools Districts, which means those are urban districts across the country. So it's a different lens looking at urban districts as opposed to rural districts. There will be some reports that were generated, will be the foundation for improving the organization, management, operation functions, and to identify best practices for replication. The idea here is that the presentation will come from the Council of Great City Schools Districts, and it will be used for improvement, not necessarily to say gotcha, but to improve the kind of operations that are taking place. They have an experienced strategic support team comprised of highly skilled and experienced chief human resources officers from other large urban school districts who will actually do the performing of the audit. The scope of work will include, but not be limited to the following. Obviously, we can push it and give them some recommendations, but a review of the data and information related to the district's human resources operations, a 4-day on-site visit to interview district and department staff and review these operations in real time, and a report outlining a roadmap to improving efficiencies and the effectiveness of these reports. They indicated the cost would be approximately $50,000 or less. Although the previous audits have been under that amount. It will look at travel, lodging, meals. I've also included in your packet, if you mind looking in your packet, a one-pager that lays out the letter from the Council of Great City Schools that explains this, in addition to a sample of a 4-day meeting that they've already done to give you some idea. And so in your packet from the Council of Great City Schools, there's an actual agenda from the council that says December 15th through the 18th, 2019. This was another district. Obviously, the district name and the personnel has been redacted, but it gives you some idea of what will take place on a 4-day visit. When they will come in on a Sunday and leave on a Wednesday, with providing the board with a detailed report of what they will be doing, and administration. We have an internal auditor who will be acting as a point of contact with this particular entity as it relates to that. So I'd like to kind of stop here and answer any questions that the board might have as it relates to the human resource audit that the board has requested that administration do.
Well, the first question I have is, you said the board is asking for it. I'm not sure when the board asked for it. So I guess that's one question I have. But the other thing too is that, I mean, usually when you decide to do something like this, there are some issues that you find in your operations. We don't just commission an audit that could cost up to $50,000. There has to be some issues, like there's been some maybe irregularities or major errors in that particular function, or the person who leads it is not as experienced as you'd like that person to be, or doesn't have the certification to lead that department and make sure it runs like a human resources department should be. So my questions are, one, when did the board, decide this? I don't recall having that discussion. And then two, what are the issues that led you to decide that a human resources audit needed to be done?
So question number one, in my initial meeting with Dr. Roberts, she indicated 3 audits that she wanted administration to look at. One was a human resources audit, one was a curriculum audit, and the third one was a policy update audit. I provided that correspondence to the board in my board superintendent correspondence in number 1, 2, and 3. We've had 3 meetings, and in those 3 meetings, I provided that to the board, indicating that that is what had been requested, and even indicated that we will be looking at the Council of Great City Schools as a initial look at. I think the initial reason that was conveyed to me was that obviously the board gets a lot of correspondence from the public, and the idea of looking at what the functions are that the board, that the Human Resource Department is doing, such that it might improve its communication mainly, but other issues as well that might be articulated in correspondence that the board gets.
And Dr. Adams, let me just follow up on that. On the day that I was nominated for this position and assumed the responsibility, I did indeed recommend at that time that we take a look at curriculum, that we take a look at HR and our policies, and just to get an audit of it, and shared that with the board at that time. And so the audit is to help us be more efficient, to make sure that the curriculum is meeting the needs of all kids and the needs of teachers. It's not an I got you proposition. It's just to see how well we are supporting student achievement. And so the HR will tell us, and let me give you an example. Matt and Antoinette, we went to a meeting, and in that meeting, we noticed that there were two principals from St. Louis Public Schools that had decided to do something different. And I think it's important that we understand how we can support our staff and our leadership team so that we train them and they leave, because things may not be optimal. And so this is a way to understand what our strengths are and what we need to do better.
Yeah, and I do recall you saying that I thought there would be more discussion than diving into an audit. Having been a former auditor, I do understand the purpose of audits, but generally you do that when there's real issues. I know we get some emails, but not an overwhelming number of emails that complain. I think you're going to always have some emails where people don't like the way things are done. That's pretty normal in any operations, human resources, payroll, whatever. I guess I guess I'm having a hard time understanding why we would go forward with this without further discussion, with the understanding of why this audit is really needed. If there is some real evidence that we have a human resources problem, not just the communication problems where someone can be trained on that, then it's easier for me to support a maybe up to $50,000 human resources audit. Now, I'm not talking about the curriculum. I am talking about human resources and I think one of the other audits. I think we have to have more than just a desire to have it. We have to have reasons behind why we do an audit. I think one of the things we just hear about these audits of some of the polls in some of our different states. And people were upset because they're saying they're audits with no real reason to audit. And that's what I kind of sense. What are the reasons for the audit? And not just because we get a few emails, which are not overwhelming with the number of teachers we have and the number of staff we have. I don't think we get an overwhelming number of audits, but we are asking the district to spend this kind of money without any solid evidence that there's a human resources problem. I would like to see that and then be able to decide whether or not a human resources an expenditure for a human resources audit would make sense. And probably if we have these ideas and their suggestions, which are great, I think maybe we need more discussion about it and then decide whether or not we actually do it or not. I just want to know what are the reasons for it. And I have not seen any real reasons for the human resources audit. And I think that comes from Dr. Adams and his team, not necessarily from the board.
Asking for an audit to find out what our strengths and weaknesses are is not just an operational issue. Our charge as the governance is to be sure that we're focused on student achievement, and the HR department plays a big role in that because they provide the staff that goes before our teachers. And so we can learn how we can best support the superintendent if we know exactly what the strengths and weaknesses are. And I'll open it up to any other member of the board who may have some opinion.
I actually get both points. I think the question right now is, has there ever been an audit done with any other departments from what's being asked? And in your opinion, Dr. Adams, basically from what Ms. Fowler is saying, do you find at this point a need to have an audit for that particular department?
So the first question is, in my 12 years here, we have not had an audit for human resources. In my 12 years here, we have had a PDK audit for the curriculum, and we have worked feverishly on board policies, which I would address a little bit tonight. I think, as you indicated, the points are well taken on both sides, but there has not been anything outstanding that has come before me that would indicate a deep dive into the Human Resources Department at this point in time. But as Dr. Roberts said, there always are concerns. There always are issues that people bring up around, transactions and all of those kinds of things. And so,
and I guess the question is, do you think this would help? Because just looking at what's being presented and what they're saying they will offer, sometimes it is good. And people look at audit as a bad thing, but sometimes it is good to have outside eyes kind of looking at it, giving you a better perspective. But do you think at this point, this is something that will assist you or add to the many other things you're dealing with?
So what I would say is the Human Resources Department under my direction reached out to Council Grace City Schools, and this is what we provided. I have an excellent relationship with Mike Castley, who is the head of Council Grace City Schools, and I would like to have a one-on-one with him first to determine if it makes sense to do so. Again, this is just a discussion. The board, there's no item before the board, just to be total transparency. This is me bringing to the board this idea. The board discusses it, comes back to administration and says, let's look at it. I have not spoken to Michael Castley. I have not spoken to any of my colleagues who've had this kind of audit. And so what I like to do is to kind of go back and do a little bit more research to find out from other superintendents how beneficial it has been, because I have not done that. This is getting a directive and reaching out to the entity that we think will be the best entity to do it, because they are in this space 100% of the time. They don't do this on a side job. So let me do that first and then come back to the board at the next work session. There's no urgency around doing this. As you can see, this was done in December of 2018-19. So this is not something we're looking to do next week, next month. So let me reach out, number one, to Mike Castley, who's the head of Council Grace City Schools. And number two, reach out to other districts that have had this audit, speak to the superintendents and the human resources officers to see what benefit it has been to them, and then come back to the board with a recommendation.
And also, I just want to add to make sure the board understands when an organization has a financial audit, it's inevitable that they have to actually go through human resources and audit them as well, because especially when you have an organization where human resources is the biggest line item expense, it is impossible to do a financial audit without doing an internal control review, not of human resources. And because I've led human resources and finances in my career, I do know how much human resources are part of the financial audit, because especially when most of your expenses are people, and it's necessary that they audit human resources. I would just ask that you definitely find out also why people ask for these audits.
Yes,
you
ma'am.
know, what the reasons are. And I guess I would like to maybe see 50,000 more on curriculum than a department that maybe doesn't need that kind of attention. So I thank you for going to them and getting those questions asked and answered, because I'd like to know why other districts have gone through this process.
Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure. Again, give me about 30 days. We'll come back at the next work session. The purpose of the work session is the discussion. And so that's what this is. And so I'll provide that when we come back in 30 days.
I'd just like to follow up on what Regina just said. We get audits every year, and I think there's been 3 since I've been here. Has any part of that ever touched on HR?
Yes, the Reuben Brown, who does an audit on finances, also touches payroll. They do they mainly function not around the transactional pieces. They mainly function around are people getting paid correctly, people are getting overpaid. They don't necessarily deal with the transactional pieces of HR. And I think in your mind, when we had the conversation, this was about the transactional piece. Somebody applying for a job, somebody getting feedback about if the job has been filled or not, those kind of operational kinds of things, not so much on the payroll side, but it's on a transactional piece.
Also, they have to look at if an employee was actually went through the process of being
Yes.
approved to be hired, if their salaries were what they were supposed to
correct.
be,
That's
if
correct.
all the approval levels were given,
That's correct.
and if they have follow-up performance reviews and things like that.
If we
So,
did background checks on
yeah,
them, all
if
of
the
those kinds of
background
things,
checks
yes,
were
they
done
do
and
that.
things like that.
And they do a sample. They don't do,
Right, and
out
of
of
course,
4,000 employees, they might do 50 or 25. They don't do everybody.
they do a statistical sample.
That's
yeah,
exactly
And they
right.
will do the same thing. They will choose a statistical sample. And so.
I'd like to say, I appreciate Ms. Fowler's expertise in that area, but I also understand what Dr. Roberts is saying. We had over a couple hundred people resign. And so I think it's very interesting to find out through a human resource audit what's really going on with our people to get a better understanding, so we'll know how to move forward and maintain our staff, because we have so many staff members that have less than 5 years worth of experience. And the more successful districts have staff members that have years and years worth of experience, but not us. So I think it's very important that we understand who we have in human resources, what we're doing, And I understand the professionals. We've had this district run by professionals for years, but yet and still, we still are losing people to this district, to other districts every year. So I don't think anything is wrong with it. And I'm certainly hoping that we will move forward with this ideal as soon as possible.
I just want to respond. If you look at this 4-day thing, what you're looking for, and I agree with that, I think we need to understand why people leave and challenge ourselves on retention. But this 4-day thing is a simple audit of processes and will not get through to what you're looking for. They're talking about substitute stipends, FMLA, job injury, sick bank things. If we're looking for an analysis of our record retention, I think we should focus on that. But this is going to be a simple, data-driven, statistically challenged audit based on this 4-day thing. And I think we should get to what we really were looking for and not go through something that is not going to provide us that kind of information.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. This is a sample. And so we can come together as a board and determine the specifics. This is just a sample of gender that took place somewhere else.
One thing that might be helpful is I noticed on the website for Great City Schools, they have samples of audits, since they're all public records anyway, so they collect them, and they do seem to be education specific. So I would just wonder if if you or your staff have a chance to look through those and see if any of that information will be helpful to have an outside person come in. And from our perspective, I also wonder too, in terms of governance, on our consent agenda tonight and our consent agenda last month, there's a lot of HR information systems, software programs that I don't fully understand. And I wonder if when your conversations with them, if they have expertise coming in and looking at just from a high level, are there things that differently can be done from that perspective? And that could be a cost savings mechanism, because when you're on a day-to-day basis using that stuff, it's sometimes hard to say, oh, we need to change this, or there might be a better product out there.
Yeah, I think some questions came from the board around consolidation as it relates to systems, whether that was academic systems or HR systems. So it's an excellent point for us to kind of ask those kind of key questions, because that might generate some savings if there are platforms that could be shared as opposed to having multiple platforms. As you saw, we have SAP maintenance, we have SAP license, we have SAP this, and so there may be beneficial in that sense. 50,000 might be chump change compared to the millions we spend for some of those kinds of things. So to your point, what I would do is go back and do some deep digging with Council of Great City Schools and then come back to the board. Again, I will not be bringing something to the board till likely August or September anyway, but it gives me an opportunity to do have a conversation with Council of Great City Schools.
And Dr. Adams, I would just like to close with the point that this is not about an operation piece. This is about student achievement, and HR is critical in that, as is policy, and as is the third piece that was recommended. All of that has a direct impact on student outcomes, and that's why we sit here as board members, to protect student outcomes.
Yes, ma'am. Our next item is a curriculum audit. We did reach out to Council of Great City Schools. I got some new information this afternoon. This was sent to you, I think, earlier. They do not do, from my understanding, a curriculum audit. So we did reach out to DESE, and DESE gave us a recommendation of something to look at as it relates to that. I do want to indicate we did a very detailed PDK audit, and so I want to find out what others might be talking about before we look to invest any dollars in this. We have a very extensive PDK audit that we did. The challenge here is that we likely need to find someone local, because the state's curriculum, the standards are aligned to the state as opposed to national. And so I think it is likely that if we go with anybody, it will be somebody local because of the local context of Missouri, as opposed to the national effort. For the HR audit, it might be much more beneficial to do nationally, but for the curriculum audit, I would think at this point in time, based on the preliminary information I have from my curriculum team, that this will likely be localized as opposed to national. So that's the only slide I have on that, because it's preliminary. We're still doing some digging on there. The next item is the board policy update. We started this process in 2017-18 in anticipation that the board would turn over and the elected board would come back in place. And so board policy, a lot of the board policies are outdated. Many policies were last updated in 1990. Many department practices are not aligned to the current policies that we have. MSBA policies are being used by other districts, and they provide an electronic version. We do not align with MSBA for a number of different reasons. Number one, the standard for MSBA is different than us. We are a metropolitan district. We did check to see what some estimates might be, and the estimates were very, very, very costly. When we looked at this in 2018 and 19, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, could easily provide those to you, but it is costly to do the deep dive around policies. Bottom line is, this kind of lays out what your responsibility as a board is as it relates to policy. The policy is a discretionary action, a guide rather. It expresses the intent of the board and expectations of the board. The policy adoption is really up to the Board of Education, not administration. The board has to adopt policies, and it really is essential to the operation of the school district to have clear, aligned policies. Sometimes people go online looking for policies and they can't find a policy aligned to what they're looking for. And so it is true that our policies are outdated, and they're outdated on our website as well. So my responsibility, or administration responsibility, is to align the policy to regulation. So even if the board comes up with changing the policy, we have to be given sufficient time to align the regulation to that policy, which is really the actionable steps that people will follow, administration as well as the public, in terms of the interpretation and implementation of the policy. The regulations specify a specific action or describe an administrative response, and the regulation tells what is to be done and who is to do it. So it makes it a responsibility of administration to write the regulations. So the board may deal with the policies. Administration's role is to deal with the regulations that align to it. These are the articles that we have. These are all of the articles that are online that are board policies. And you can see from Article 0 to Article 9, and it lays out all of the policies that we have right now, at least the big article pictures of the policies that we will be looking at. I won't go over this, but this is a policy that is about name changing. When we looked at changing the name of Kennard to Classical Junior, we looked at our policies, and this is our policy. You have a copy of it, not a copy, you have it's in the PowerPoint, and I apologize, I didn't make a copy for you. I sent it to you electronically. But this is the MSBA policy. You can see that the framing of their policy is different from ours in terms of an article. There said FF. Then when we looked at the policy, you see SLPS policy number here. You see the title of the policy here. MSBs would be FF, and then we will go through this process you see about the recommended action. This is the policy on fiscal. It shows that the SLPS policy is 3100. The title that it falls on, it was planning. The MSBA alignment would be DB. It's called annual budget in their policy. The question will become, do we adopt MSB policy and rescind SLPS policy? So what I'm framing for you is the process that will be followed for us to look at our policy, look at MSB policy, and then to make the changes. Your policy requires that legal has to review all changes that take place. That is what your policy says right now under board governance or guidance. And so Mr. St. Elmo or the representatives from the board would have to approve any policy change. What I like to do is to have you look in your packet. It's a 3-page document that says old version, St. Louis Board of Education, and then new version. It should be a 3-page that's stapled together or put together. And this is just an example. The old policy, St. Louis Board of Education on instruction and curriculum, since we're talking about instruction and curriculum, and this has to do with ESOL policy. It was last updated on June 26, 1990. It was revised on December 7, 1999, and revised again on July 24, 2001. You can see the red line copy of that policy that we did. And we updated that policy and revised it on November the 4th, 2016. That's what would have to take place in every single case. Then you see the new version of the policy. The new version of the policy is the last piece with the revised on November 4, 2016. In every single case, we would have to do this on policies that the board would ask us to update. A red line copy, Mr. St. Elmo would have to sign off on it. The board would actually have to vote every single time to approve the policy. What I'm framing for you right now is a process that we would follow, and we started this in 2018 and 19. Foundation and basic commitments will be various persons will look at that. School board governance and operations will be Mr. Sanoma. General school administration will be superintendent and legal. Ms. Banks will look at fiscal management. Support services will be looked at by Mr. Watson, which is operations. He would also look at facility development. Personnel will be Majors, Dozier. Those are persons in HR, Mr. Burton and Ms. Major. Instruction, since I don't have a deputy superintendent of academics, that would be that person. And then Mr. Brown deals with the student services. And lastly, Ms. Willis would deal with school community relations. If we were addressing this from an administrative perspective, we would look at policies that were outdated, come up with the kind of changes that would be made, make recommendations to the board after review by legal, and then the board would adopt that policy. Obviously, the board will weigh in on any kind of policy change that would take place. This is a 2 to 3 year process. This is not overnight in any way, shape, or form. And so I want the board to be aware of that. Once we go down this road, if that is something that the board is interested in administration doing, it is time consuming, it is detailed, it is a process that would take time. It would be my request from the board, and that's why I put next steps here. What articles would the board want to prioritize? Because obviously we can't tackle all of this at the same time. What would be the timeline the board will be looking at? And lastly, the board has to be committed to defining a schedule of what to look at with this. And at every work session, we will be bringing this up. And then the board at the subsequent board meeting will be making a change around the policies that would take place. So again, the board president asked me to look at this. This is something that has come up before the board. This is something that the SAB took up as well prior to the board getting in place. And we stopped because we know the elected board will be getting in place, and we did not want to walk into that space because it's really owned by the elected board as opposed to the SAB. So the SAB did look at it. We did do a lot of work on it. I have a stack this big on all of the kind of stuff that we've looked at already. So we've already jumped in this space a little bit. The question becomes what kind of direction the board wants to give administration to look at this, and how committed is the board to look at it, because it will be time consuming and the board will have to work through the process.
I do want to say the good news is that Article 9, the governance committee is going to handle. So
Good.
we got that one.
Good. Great.
But-
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
But I don't see how we could possibly not do this, even if it takes time, because these policies are just too old to not be updated, you know.
Correct.
And I remember going through a process like that, and you're right, it does take a long time, but once it's done,
It's done.
it's
That's
done,
right.
and it can be reviewed annually or by, twice each, 2 times every other year or something like that. But I don't see how it's possible that we cannot update these policies, because if we're caught off guard and something's there that we didn't intend to be there anymore, we're going to be held accountable for that. So I hope that as a board, we really come together and put some timelines on getting this done. And yes, it's going to take a lot from your staff to do it, because ultimately we'll be reviewing what you do. But I think it's something we have to commit ourselves to. But I do have this question. Have we, by any chance, thought about hiring somebody to do this for us, and using funds to get someone to do this, of course, with Mr. St. Omar's help, instead of having pulling your staff's time to go through all of these things? Because oftentimes, and I've read some of these policies, even though there's education related, they're so similar to so many HR policies that exist in many organizations. Have we considered maybe getting an estimate from an organization to do something like this?
So we did 3 years ago. I don't know what that cost was, but it was quite expensive. That's number one, and I can go back and look at what that cost was. So we have considered it. The challenge, quite frankly, Ms. Fowler, is even if we get some outside entity, they have to talk to our staff, because they will still have to circle back and spend an ordered amount of time with staff to ask them, does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Do you want this in here? And that kind of stuff. What I have considered is likely hiring somebody on a temporary basis to work with us to do so, and make them an employee who will be with us 100% of the time. And that's all their role and responsibility is to do. So that is one of the things I have considered. A lot would depend upon which direction the board gives me. If this is something the board wants to run fast to get done, if this is something the board puts a timeline to get done in 12 months, if this is something the board puts a timeline to in 2 years, is this if the board puts a timeline around 3 months? A lot depends upon what kind of feedback I get from you in terms of what direction I might take, or we might take in terms of presenting something. So yes, what I would like to do first is find the estimates we had previously, and then have the board look at those, and then make some decision around where to go next. But I do have those estimates. I have to dig them up. Mr. Clark was the previous person who got those estimates that I can provide to the board.
Dr. Adams, the question around the policies, I've also had a brief conversation with Mr. St. Omer about.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
he indicated that there was some kind of company or a school district. So if he could take a few minutes and kind of give us a debrief around that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. The district's policies, as has been discussed here tonight, are very old. And for some time, we were trying to identify who, because there were no records in the district as to what company or organization was associated with them. Just literally shortly before the pandemic, I was explaining to Dr. Roberts that we had identified another large urban district that was using the same policies. I had made a reach out to their legal department literally within 30 days before this pandemic hit. I didn't circle back with them, have not circled back with them during the pandemic. Ideally, if we can identify that company who was affiliated, historically, it is very often those policy companies will have a policy service or an updating service associated with it, even if for no other reason, just to be able to identify the company for purposes of being able to try to tweak our policies or see if there's any benefit streamlining for efficiency's sake. That was what I had discussed with Dr. Roberts. And now that it appears that schools will be getting more, I'm putting air quotes, normal in the fall, probably will begin to reach out in the fall to that same school district. Again, I think it's probably, given what my own district, working with this district's experience during this pandemic, it's probably going to be the fall before school districts are able to kind of focus on the more day-to-day operational things like that. But I do have a request into their legal department for identification.
Thank you.
So the last item on my agenda, really quickly, maybe the last two, ESSA fund survey. In your packet, you have an ESSA fund survey. It closed on Friday. This is a high level, 2,900 families responded, or persons responded. You can see what the breakdown is and what the top 3 priorities are. I want the board to be aware that this is just the first iteration of the data. We have an entity slicing the data by the groups that responded and what their priorities were. So at the board meeting, I'll give you a detailed analysis similar to the CSMB survey that you receive relative to what families are saying and what persons are saying. So take this as a high level one-pager from Friday night at 12 midnight when we close the survey. And I will be giving the board a full report at the board meeting around the survey data. Don't necessarily want to discuss it at this point in time, but just want to make the board aware of it. As it relates to the ESSA funds, the Wallace Foundation, who is connected to the Council of Great City Schools, is offering districts that are part of the Wallace Foundation, and I have it in yellow, it's in your packet as well, 8 days of strategic planning to assist districts across the country in terms of working their plan around spending ESSA dollars. And so I want to make you aware that we will likely take the benefit of this particular free consultation as we put our plan together. I will likely come back to the board in August or September what that plan looks like for the spending of these dollars. Staff will be working in a retreat over the next 30 days around that, as well as taking the information from here and the consultant as well. Similar to what we did with our restart plan that the board got updates on a regular basis. We will be doing the same thing around how we use these dollars. It is estimated that we've already received 10 million, another 46.8 million. We don't know what the third iteration is. We think it's around 100 million, but that has not been confirmed. But these are the dollars I'm talking about in terms of how those dollars are going to be spent over the next 3 years. And so what you're hearing from me is preliminary survey data. You will get an update at the next board meeting. That's number one. Number two, the Wallace Foundation has agreed to work with districts as it relates to consultation around how to spend those dollars or the strategy around being transparent and that kind of stuff. And number three, administration will come back to the board sometimes in August or September with recommendations based upon feedback from the survey, as well as the retreats that we are going to have over the next 2 months to align how those dollars might be used to address the top priorities from the community. Any questions regarding those things at this point in time?
Just a quick question. Will the goals that the board has identified for this school year going forth be used to guide how we plug in dollars?
Our
The
strategic
reading, the
plan,
math, and the college and career readiness.
again, we're going to frame everything around the three things I just indicated. But yes, obviously the goals of the board as well as the transformation plan will be part of the conversation discussion. And I said one more thing. I just kind of want to make this announcement to the public and to the board. We are planning a vaccination event with vaccine approval now extended to children ages 12 and over. St. Louis Public Schools is continuing to work with the Urban League and the Missouri National Guard to offer Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines to district students ages 12 and older. All 12 and older students will have the opportunity to sign up for the 2-dose Pfizer vaccine, the only one approved for youth ages 12 and over at this time. Appointments will be scheduled at Vashon High School for the first dose on Saturday, June 5th. This is an announcement to the public, but we have about 2 weeks to advertise. And the second dose will be Saturday, the 26th. Why we're doing it in June? Because the National Guard has indicated they'll be leaving the city after June 30th. A parent or guardian must accompany students ages 12 to 15 to the vaccination event. Bus transportation will be provided by the district. Our sign up includes a place for students to indicate a pickup location if they need transportation to the event. Once we collect all that information, we will draft a schedule for bus pickup and distribute it to families. We will send reminders for the second dose during the week of June the 21st. If families do not and cannot attend the second dose dates, we will suggest alternative places for them to get the second dose. We are coordinating this obviously with our summer school. We'll have some 6,000 students in summer school, and we want to try to do our best to get students prepared for the fall. It is likely that we will come back in August and do another one, but this is the first one that we're doing in June. The Cardinals have agreed to give free tickets to anybody who comes to do that as well. And so we are hoping to get a minimum of 500, but upward of 1,000 that we could accommodate at Vashon High School. So I want to give the board an update relative to what we've been working on feverishly to try to get doses to our kids. If there are no other questions for the board, I'll sit. Thank you. I do want to indicate one thing. At the last board meeting, the board asked us to make sure there were paper surveys. Those paper surveys will be in the American on Thursday's paper. And it's out already? Okay. The American did put paper surveys in the American. We will be collecting that data and adding it to the 2910 as well. I think that closes when, Ms. Willis? May 28th. So we've given some more time for that information to come based on the board's request at the last board meeting. Thank you.
If there are no additional questions or concerns at this time, I make a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Ms. Sonier,
Yes.
Ms. Cousins, Yes.
Ms. Fowler,
Yes.
Ms. Vowell,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Dr. Roberts.
Yes.
We are adjourned.